There are moments in life that don't feel important when they happen. Not because they are small, but because they are quiet. No warning, no music, no sudden shift in the air. Just a simple action. Like standing up from a chair, adjusting your coat, and walking out of a cafe, completely unaware that you've just stepped out of a version of your life you will never return to. Clara didn't know that morning would become one of those moments. But later, much later, when everything had already unraveled, when every memory had begun to rearrange itself into something sharper, something harder to ignore, she would come back to this exact point. Not the betrayal, not the video, not even Daniel. She would come back to the feeling, that strange, almost invisible pause at the door. When something inside her hesitated, and she ignored it. Have you ever looked back on a moment and realized that you knew? Not clearly, not logically, but somewhere deep beneath the noise of your thoughts, beneath the need to believe, beneath the comfort of familiarity, you felt something wasn't right, and you chose peace over truth. Because truth disrupts everything. If you've ever stayed in something longer than you should have, if you've ever trusted someone because they felt right, not because they were right, then this story is going to stay with you. And before we go any further, take a second. If stories like this speak to you, the kind that don't just entertain, but make you reflect, make you question, make you grow, go ahead and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Because this one isn't just about love. It's about the quiet ways we lose ourselves, and the even quieter ways we find our way back. That morning began like every other one Clara had learned to survive, not enjoy. The alarm rang at 6:30, not loud, not aggressive, just consistent, like everything else in her life. She reached for her phone before opening her eyes, silencing it with practiced precision. No snooze, no hesitation. Clara didn't believe in giving mornings second chances. You either got up, or you stayed stuck. And she had spent too many years feeling stuck. The apartment was still, not peaceful, just empty, in a way that had long ago stopped feeling uncomfortable. The kind of silence you grow into. She moved through her routine without thinking. Coffee machine, bathroom light, closet door. The same sequence, every day. Like her body had memorized a script her mind no longer needed to read. But that morning, something was slightly off. Not enough to alarm her, just enough to exist. She noticed it while pouring her coffee. The way her hand paused mid-air for half a second longer than usual, like she was waiting for something, or remembering something she couldn't quite reach. She frowned slightly, then shook it off. Just tired, she murmured to herself. That was always the easiest explanation, and the most convenient. Daniel used to say that about her, not the words themselves, but the way he looked at her when she brushed things off. You do that a lot, he told her once. They had been sitting across from each other in the cafe, the same one she would return to later that day. Sunlight stretching across the table between them like a quiet invitation. Do what? She asked. Reduce things, he said gently. Make them smaller than they are. Clara smiled, not because she agreed, but because she recognized the tone. It wasn't judgment. It was observation. You make it sound like a flaw, she replied. I think it's a defense, Daniel said. And then, after a pause, one that worked for you, until it didn't. She remembered the way that landed, not heavy, just accurate. And accuracy, she had learned, was far more unsettling than criticism. By 7:15, she was dressed, neutral tones, clean lines, nothing that drew attention. Clara had never been interested in being seen, not fully. There was comfort in blending into spaces, in existing without being examined too closely. It gave her control, or at least, the illusion of it. She picked up her keys from the small ceramic dish near the door, checked her phone, slipped it into her coat pocket. Everything was in place. Everything was normal. And yet, as she reached for the door handle, something inside her hesitated again, not loudly, not urgently, just enough to exist. Her fingers tightened slightly around the metal. A pause, a breath. Then she opened the door and stepped out. Looking back, she would try to locate that exact feeling, to dissect it, to understand why her body had reacted before her mind caught up. But memory is not precise. It doesn't replay events the way they happened. It reshapes them, softens some edges, sharpens others, until what remains feels more like meaning than truth. And the meaning she would later assign to that moment was simple. She had known. Not everything, not the full story, but enough to question. Enough to pause, enough to choose differently. And she didn't. The cafe sat on the corner of a quiet street. Nothing remarkable, nothing designed to stand out. That's why she liked it. It didn't ask anything from her. No expectations, no performance, no need to explain who she was or how she felt. She could just be. Daniel had noticed that the first time she brought him there. You like places that don't require you to show up fully, he said, stirring his coffee absently. Clara raised an eyebrow. That's a very specific observation. He smiled slightly. You're a very specific person. She didn't respond right away, because part of her wanted to ask, and what does that make you? But she didn't, because questions like that open doors. And Clara had spent years learning which doors were safer left closed. That morning, the cafe smelled like roasted coffee beans and something faintly sweet. Vanilla, maybe. The barista nodded at her in recognition. Usual? He asked. She nodded. There was comfort in being known in small ways, not deeply, just enough. She took her cup and moved toward her usual table by the window, sat down, set her phone on the table, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to do nothing. No scrolling, no thinking ahead, just sitting, breathing, existing in a moment that didn't demand anything from her. It was rare, and maybe that's why it mattered. Daniel entered her thoughts the way he always did. Quietly, not forced, just present. She wondered what he was doing. Not in a possessive way, not even in a curious way, just as a passing thought. Like remembering a song you hadn't heard in a while. He had a way of lingering like that. Not overwhelming, but persistent. And if she was honest with herself, she didn't fully understand why. Because their relationship, if that's what it was, had never been clearly defined. No labels, no expectations, just conversations. Long ones, the kind that made you feel seen. Without ever quite understanding how. And maybe that was the problem. Or maybe that was the point. She finished her coffee, checked the time, and stood up. Everything about the moment felt ordinary, unremarkable, forgettable. She adjusted her coat, reached for her phone, and walked toward the door. It wasn't until she reached the sidewalk, until the cool air brushed against her face, until she took a few steps away from the cafe, that the absence made itself known. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like something that had always been there. Suddenly wasn't. Clara stopped walking. Her hand moved instinctively to her shoulder. Nothing. No strap. No weight. Her purse. She had left it behind. She closed her eyes briefly. Not in frustration. Not even in annoyance. Just recognition of something small. Something simple. And yet, something that felt like the beginning of something she didn't yet understand. She turned back toward the cafe, and, without knowing it, she walked straight into the moment that would change how she remembered everything. The walk back should have felt insignificant. 3 minutes, maybe 4 if she slowed down. The same sidewalk, the same quiet rhythm of passing cars, the same early morning faces moving with purpose or pretending to have one. But something about retracing your steps changes the weight of them. Clara noticed that almost immediately. It wasn't the distance. It was the awareness. Every step felt more deliberate, as if she were walking towards something instead of simply returning for something. Her purse. That's all it was. Just a forgotten item. And yet, her chest felt slightly tighter than it should have. Have you ever gone back for something small and felt like you were walking into something bigger? Not because you knew what was waiting, but because something inside you had already started preparing for it. That quiet tension, that subtle shift, the kind you can't explain, so you ignore it. Clara had gotten very good at ignoring things she couldn't explain. It made life easier, cleaner, less complicated, at least on the surface. As she reached the cafe door, she paused again. This time, it wasn't instinctive. It was conscious. Her hand rested against the handle, but she didn't push it open right away. Instead, she looked through the glass. Everything inside appeared exactly the same. The same barista, the same scattered customers, the same calm, undisturbed atmosphere. Nothing had changed. So why did it feel like something had? She exhaled softly and shook her head. You're overthinking, she whispered. And just like that, she opened the door. The bell chimed, soft, familiar, comforting even. But comfort, Clara had learned, can sometimes be misleading. Hey, the barista said, glancing up. You just left. I forgot my purse, she replied, her tone light, almost dismissive. Like it didn't matter. Like she didn't feel the faint tension threading through her chest. Oh, yeah, he said, nodding toward the back. The manager has it. Clara followed his gaze. The manager. She had seen him before. Always present, always observant, but never intrusive. The kind of person who noticed things without making it obvious. Or at least, that's what she had assumed. He was standing near the counter now, watching her, not intensely, not suspiciously, just aware. And for some reason, that awareness made her more conscious of herself. Hi, she said as she approached. I think I left my purse here. He nodded slowly. Yes, he said. You did. There was a pause. Not long, but noticeable. Clara waited for him to hand it over. He didn't. Instead, he studied her for a moment, like he was deciding something. Not about her purse. About her. And that was the first moment something inside her shifted from unease to curiosity. Is everything okay? She asked. It was a simple question, but it carried more weight than she intended. The manager hesitated, then glanced briefly toward the hallway that led to the back. And when he looked at her again, there was something different in his expression. Not concern, not exactly. Something closer to caution. Your purse is safe, he said. Clara nodded slowly. Okay. Another pause. And then, but before I give it back to you, there's something I think you should see. Those words didn't land like a warning. They didn't feel urgent or alarming. They just settled, quietly, like everything else in Clara's life. What do you mean? She asked. The manager gestured toward the back. Just come with me. There was a moment, brief but real, where Clara considered saying no, not out of fear, but out of instinct. That same quiet instinct she had ignored earlier, the one that didn't explain itself, the one that didn't need to. But curiosity has a way of overriding instinct, especially when nothing looks obviously wrong, and nothing looked wrong, so she followed him. The hallway was narrow, dimmer than the cafe. The sounds of the front, cups clinking, low conversation, the hum of the coffee machine, faded with each step, until all that remained was silence. Not empty silence, but contained, controlled, like stepping into a space where things were observed, rather than lived. Clara felt it immediately. That subtle shift again. Her senses sharpened slightly, not out of fear, but awareness. Is this about my purse? She asked. Her voice sounded quieter here. Different. Yes, the manager replied. But something about the way he said it made the answer feel incomplete. They entered a small room. Security monitors lined the wall, multiple screens displaying different angles of the cafe. Clara stopped just inside the doorway. For a second, she wasn't sure why her body felt tense. There was nothing threatening about the room, nothing alarming, and yet, she folded her arms lightly across her chest. A subconscious gesture. Protective. The manager moved toward the controls. You left your purse on your chair, he said, pressing a few buttons. One of the screens shifted. Clara saw herself, from earlier that morning, sitting at her table, drinking her coffee, completely unaware she was being watched. The sight was strange, not disturbing, just unfamiliar, like looking at a version of yourself you don't fully recognize. That's me, she said quietly. He nodded. You got up. You left. The footage played. Clara watched herself stand, adjust her coat, pick up her phone, and walk away, leaving the purse behind. So simple, so ordinary. And yet, watching it now, it felt like something else entirely, like witnessing the exact moment something was set in motion. The footage continued. A few seconds passed. Nothing happened. Clara felt herself relax slightly. Maybe this was nothing. Maybe he just wanted to show her where she left it. Maybe. The screen shifted, and someone walked into frame. Clara's breath caught, before she even consciously registered why. It was Daniel. He moved differently. That was the first thing she noticed. Not what he was doing. How he was doing it. There was no hesitation in his steps. No quiet observation. No softness. He walked straight to her table, sat down in her chair, reached for her purse, like he had every right to, like he knew it would be there. Clara's brows furrowed slightly. Why would he? She didn't finish the question, because the answer was already beginning to form. Not clearly, but enough. Daniel opened the purse, casually, efficiently, not curious, not confused, intentional. He pulled out her wallet, flipped it open, looked through it, paused, and then he smiled. Clara felt something shift in her chest, not sharp, not painful, just heavy, because that smile, it wasn't the one she knew. It wasn't warm. It wasn't thoughtful. It wasn't the smile of someone who listened. It was something else, something practiced, something detached. And in that moment, she realized something she wasn't ready to fully understand. Yet, there are versions of people we fall in love with, and versions of them that exist without us. And sometimes, those versions don't match. Wait, she said softly. But the video didn't wait. Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, dialed a number, held it to his ear. Clara leaned forward slightly. Her heartbeat had changed now. Not faster, just more present, more aware. Daniel spoke, clear enough for the camera to capture, and what he said was simple, calm, almost casual. Yeah, he said. It's her. A pause. Then, she still has no idea. Silence, not in the room, but inside Clara. Everything slowed, not dramatically, not like in movies, just subtly, like her mind had stepped back for a second, trying to understand something that didn't fit. It's her. Her. She still has no idea. No idea about what? About him? About what he was doing? About what she meant to him? Or what she didn't? The manager paused the video. The screen froze. Daniel, mid-frame. Phone still near his ear. Smile still faintly visible. Clara stared at it, not reacting, not speaking, just looking, as if staring long enough might rearrange what she had just seen into something that made sense. But it didn't, because the truth doesn't reshape itself to comfort us. It just waits. Until we're ready to see it. I thought you should know, the manager said quietly. Clara didn't respond, not because she didn't hear him, but because something deeper had already begun, a quiet process. The kind that doesn't ask permission, memory. Moments began to surface. Small ones, insignificant ones. The way Daniel always chose where they met. The way he avoided certain questions. The way he listened, so carefully, so precisely, like he was collecting something. Not sharing, collecting, and suddenly, those moments didn't feel random anymore. They felt connected. Clara exhaled slowly. Her arms loosened. Her posture shifted, not into panic, not into anger, but into something quieter, something more dangerous. Awareness. Can I see it again? She asked. The manager nodded, and as the footage rewound, Clara prepared, without realizing it, to watch her own memories begin to change. Before we go further, I need to ask you something. Have you ever ignored a feeling and later realized it was trying to protect you? If that's ever happened to you, even once, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and stay with me. Because what Clara is about to uncover will change the way you see trust, love, and intuition forever. There's a moment, right after something doesn't make sense, when your mind tries to fix it for you. Not by finding the truth, but by softening it. Clara felt that happening now. Standing in that dim security room, staring at the frozen image of Daniel holding her purse, her mind didn't rush to fear. It reached for explanation. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe this isn't what it looks like. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, because misunderstanding is safer than betrayal. It keeps the world intact. It protects the version of reality you've already built. And Clara had built hers carefully. Play it again, she said. Her voice was steady, too steady. The manager nodded and rewound the footage. Clara didn't move this time. She didn't lean forward, didn't react. She just watched, more carefully now. Not as someone witnessing something shocking, but as someone searching for something she might have missed. There she was again, sitting at the table, calm, unaware. Clara studied her own posture, the way she held her cup, the way she glanced out the window between sips. She looked peaceful, and that, somehow, made what followed feel heavier. Because whatever this was, it had existed alongside that peace, not after it, not separate from it, but within it. She watched herself stand, adjust her coat, pick up her phone, walk away, leaving the purse behind. Again, so simple, so avoidable. And yet, it had happened. A few seconds passed. Then Daniel entered the frame. Clara forced herself not to react this time, not to focus on the shock of seeing him. Instead, she focused on the details, the things she hadn't noticed before. His posture, straight, certain. His pace, unhurried, but direct. No hesitation. No scanning the room like someone looking for her. Just movement with purpose, like he already knew she wasn't there. That thought settled quietly in her mind. Like he already knew. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. Had she told him she would be there? No, they hadn't planned to meet that morning. At least, she didn't think they had. Memory shifted. Not fully, just enough to make her question it. Daniel sat down, her chair, her space, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt like something small, something insignificant, until he reached for her purse. This time, Clara didn't look away, didn't flinch. She watched his hands, steady, confident, familiar, not the hands of someone unsure, not the hands of someone doing something they shouldn't, but the hands of someone who had done this before. Stop it, she said quietly. The manager paused the video. Daniel's hand hovered just above her wallet. Clara tilted her head slightly. Zoom in, she added. The manager adjusted the footage. Closer, now. Clearer, and that's when she saw it. Not the action. The expression. Daniel wasn't curious. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even cautious. He was focused, like he was looking for something specific. Play. He opened the wallet, flipped through it, not slowly, not thoughtfully, quickly, efficiently, like he knew exactly where to look. Clara's chest tightened slightly, not painfully, just noticeably, because that kind of familiarity doesn't come from guessing. It comes from knowing. He paused on her ID, held it a second longer than everything else, then smiled. That smile again. Clara felt it differently this time. Before, it had confused her. Now, it clarified something. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't affection. It was recognition. Like confirming something. Like finding what he came for. Pause, she said again. The manager did. Clara stared at the screen. At the version of Daniel she had never seen, and for the first time, a question formed that didn't try to protect her. It challenged her. Who have I been talking to? Play it, she said. Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, dialed, waited. Clara's heartbeat slowed, not because she was calm, but because her mind was focusing now, sharpening, preparing. He spoke. Yeah. A pause. Then, it's her. Clara didn't react, not outwardly, but something inside her shifted. That sentence. It didn't include her name. It didn't include emotion. Just identification. Like she was a subject, not a person. She still has no idea. This time, Clara closed her eyes, just briefly, not to escape it, but to feel it, fully, without distraction. No idea. No idea about what? About him? About what he was doing? About why he was there? Or about what she meant to him? Stop, she said softly. The video froze again. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but full of things that haven't been said yet, full of realizations still forming. Clara opened her eyes, looked at the screen again, and something strange happened. She didn't feel shocked anymore. She felt clear, not completely, not comfortably, but enough. Enough to know that this wasn't random. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't something that could be explained away with a simple conversation. This was intentional. Do you know him? The manager asked gently. Clara hesitated, not because she didn't have an answer, but because the answer suddenly felt complicated. Yes, she said. Then, after a pause, I thought I did. The manager didn't press further. He didn't need to, because Clara had already started doing something far more powerful than reacting. She was remembering, and memory, when it's no longer filtered through trust, becomes something else entirely. It becomes evidence. I need to see something else, she said. The manager looked at her. What do you mean? Clara kept her eyes on the screen. Earlier footage, she said. Other days. He hesitated slightly. Why? Clara exhaled slowly. Because she was beginning to understand something that most people don't realize until much later. Truth doesn't usually exist in one moment. It exists in patterns, and patterns only become visible when you stop looking at things individually. Because I don't think this is the first time, she said quietly. The manager studied her for a second, then nodded. He adjusted the controls, scrolled through different timestamps, different days, different angles. The screen flickered, changed, stopped. Clara leaned in slightly, and what she saw next didn't shock her. It confirmed her. Daniel. Again. Different day, different time, same table, same calm confidence. But this time, Clara wasn't in the frame. Her stomach dropped. Not dramatically, not violently, just enough. Enough to feel it. Play it, she said. Daniel sat down, looked around briefly, then reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, checked something, waited, and then someone else entered the frame, a woman. Clara's breath stilled, not because of who the woman was, but because of what she represented. The woman sat down across from Daniel. They spoke, calmly, familiar, like people who had already met before. Clara watched closely, not with jealousy, not with anger, but with understanding that was beginning to take shape. Daniel leaned forward slightly, listened, nodded, the same way he had with her, the same expressions, the same timing, the same careful attention. And suddenly, it wasn't special anymore. Stop, Clara said. The screen froze. Daniel mid-conversation with someone else, mirroring the same version of himself she thought was unique to her. Clara stepped back slightly. Her arms dropped to her sides, and for the first time since entering the room, she felt something close to emotion. Not anger, not heartbreak, but something quieter, something deeper. Recognition. He does this, she said. Not a question, a statement. The manager didn't respond. He didn't need to, because Clara had just crossed a line, not in the situation, but in her understanding. This wasn't about one moment, one lie, one betrayal. This was a pattern, and she had been part of it. Clara looked back at the screen one last time, at Daniel, at the version of him she thought she knew, and then at the version of him that existed without her. And for the first time, she didn't try to reconcile the two. She accepted something far more difficult. They were the same. Show me more, she said quietly, because now she wasn't trying to understand him anymore. She was trying to understand how she hadn't seen it. The hardest truths don't arrive loudly. They don't break things all at once. They settle in slowly, quietly, until you realize they've already changed everything. Clara felt that now, not as panic, not as heartbreak, but as something far more unsettling. Clarity. The screen flickered again. Another day, another timestamp, another version of the same pattern. Daniel. The same table, the same posture, the same quiet control. Play it, Clara said. Her voice didn't shake. That surprised her, because a part of her expected something louder by now. Anger, disbelief, even denial. But instead, she felt focused. The footage began. Daniel was already seated this time, waiting, not impatiently, not distracted, just still, like someone who understood timing. Clara leaned in slightly. Her eyes scanned everything now, not just him. The space, the details, the small things she had never thought to notice before. A few seconds later, someone approached the table. Another woman, different from the last, different posture, different energy, but the same outcome. She sat. They spoke, and Daniel became someone Clara recognized. He softened, not genuinely, but precisely, like someone adjusting a tone they had practiced. He listened, nodded, maintained eye contact just long enough, spoke just little enough. Clara's chest tightened again, because she knew that rhythm, that exact rhythm. That was how he spoke to her, not overwhelming, not distant, perfectly balanced, the kind of presence that makes you feel heard, without ever asking too much from him in return. The woman across from him laughed softly. Daniel smiled, that same smile, measured, controlled, effective. Clara felt it then, not pain, not yet, but something sharper than confusion, displacement, like a memory being pulled out of its original place, and shown to belong somewhere else. Pause, she said. The manager did. The room fell quiet again. Clara stared at the screen, her reflection faintly visible over the frozen image, and for a moment, she saw both versions at once. The version of herself who believed she was seen, and the version of herself who had been studied. She exhaled slowly. Keep going, she said. More footage, more days, more women. Not many, not dozens, but enough. Enough to form a pattern that couldn't be ignored. Different conversations, different expressions. Same Daniel, always controlled, always observant, always slightly distant. And that's when it fully settled. Not just what he was doing, but how. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't improvising. He was adapting. Each woman received a version of him, tailored just enough to feel real. Clara swallowed lightly. Her throat felt dry now, not from shock, but from realization. All those moments she thought were unique weren't. All those conversations she replayed in her mind weren't special. They were repeated. Why? She asked softly. Not to the manager, not even out loud, just into the space. Why her? Why any of them? But the deeper question came immediately after, the one that mattered more. How did I not see it? The manager shifted slightly beside her. Do you want me to stop? He asked. Clara shook her head. No. Then, after a pause, I need to understand it. And that was the moment everything changed. Because she wasn't reacting anymore. She was learning. There's a difference. A quiet but powerful difference. Reaction keeps you in the moment. Learning pulls you out of it. Gives you perspective, distance, clarity. And Clara needed that now, more than anything. Go back, she said, to the first video. The manager rewound. The original footage appeared again. Daniel, her purse, her table, play. This time, Clara didn't focus on what he was doing. She focused on what she had missed. The timing. He entered too quickly, not like someone passing by, not like someone just arriving, like someone who knew exactly when she would be gone. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That thought connected to something, a memory. Faint, but present. Stop, she said. The manager paused. Clara stepped closer to the screen. When was this? She asked. About 10 minutes after you left, he replied. 10 minutes. Clara's mind moved quickly now, reconstructing, replaying. She had left, walked down the street, realized her purse was missing. No. She froze. That realization, it hadn't come immediately. There had been a gap, a delay. Clara's breathing slowed. That's strange, she murmured. The manager looked at her. What is? She didn't answer right away, because she was following something deeper now. A pattern inside her own memory. I didn't notice right away, she said. What do you mean? I walked, maybe halfway down the street before I realized my purse was gone. The manager nodded slowly. Okay. Clara shook her head slightly. No, it should have been immediate. He frowned. Why? Because Clara's hand lifted slightly, instinctively, toward her shoulder. The weight, she said. Her voice was quieter now, more precise. I always feel it. Her purse, she always felt it. Every morning, every step. It wasn't something she forgot. It was something her body registered automatically. So why hadn't she noticed? The answer came gently, not forcefully, because something had distracted her. Or someone. Clara's chest tightened. A memory surfaced. Clearer now. The moment she left the cafe, her phone, she had checked it. There had been a message. Her heartbeat picked up slightly. From Daniel. She closed her eyes briefly, and there it was. The message she hadn't thought about until now. Did you leave already? Clara's eyes opened slowly. Her gaze returned to the screen, to Daniel, to the exact moment he walked in, 10 minutes after she left, after she had been distracted, after she hadn't noticed her purse was gone, because her attention had been pulled elsewhere. Her breath left her slowly, not sharp, not heavy, just steady. He knew, she said. The manager didn't respond, but he didn't need to, because Clara had just uncovered something far more important than the video itself. This wasn't random. It was timed, deliberate, calculated. Daniel hadn't just taken advantage of a mistake. He had created the conditions for it. Clara stepped back. Her body felt different now. Not tense, not frozen, just aware, completely aware. And with awareness came something unexpected. Not anger, not sadness, but distance. The kind that allows you to see clearly. The kind that breaks illusions. She looked at the screen one last time. At Daniel, at the version of him she had trusted, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to protect that version anymore. She let it go, not dramatically, just quietly, the same way it had been built. Can I have my purse now? She asked. The manager nodded. Of course. They walked back down the hallway. The cafe sounds returned gradually. The hum, the voices, the normalcy, and yet, everything felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because she had. As the manager handed her purse back, Clara held it for a moment, feeling its weight, real, familiar, but now, symbolic, because it wasn't just something she had forgotten. It was something that had been used, a small moment, turned into a doorway. Are you okay? The manager asked gently. Clara looked at him, considered the question, and for the first time, she didn't answer automatically. I don't know yet, she said. And that was the most honest thing she could have said. She turned, walked toward the door, paused briefly, her hand resting on the handle. That same moment, but this time, she didn't ignore it. She acknowledged it. And then, she stepped outside, not back into the same day, but into something else entirely, a version of her life, where she would have to relearn what was real, and what never was. Before we go further, tell me this honestly. At this point, would you confront him immediately? Or would you walk away and never give him the chance to explain? Because Clara is about to make a choice. That will change not just how she sees him, but how she sees herself. And if you're already feeling that shift, that quiet realization creeping in, go ahead and like this story. Subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. And stay with me, because the truth ahead, it's not just about deception, it's about why we sometimes choose not to see it. Memory doesn't return all at once. It comes in pieces. A sentence here, a look there, a pause you didn't understand at the time, but suddenly do. Clara didn't go home right away. She walked, not with a destination, but with a need. To think, to separate what she felt from what she now knew, because the two were no longer the same. Have you ever realized that a memory you once found comforting was actually incomplete? Not wrong, just missing context. And once that context appears, the entire meaning changes. That's what Clara was stepping into now. Not a new story, but a rewritten version of the same one. She turned onto a quieter street, the kind she usually avoided because it forced her to be alone with her thoughts. Today, that's exactly what she needed. No noise, no distractions, just space. Daniel didn't enter her mind like a person anymore. He entered like a question. When did this actually begin? Not the relationship, not the conversations, but the pattern. Clara slowed her steps, closed her eyes briefly, and let the first memory come. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't special. It was ordinary. The first time she met him, it had been raining that day, not heavily, just enough to make people move faster, heads slightly lowered, conversations shorter. Clara had been sitting in the cafe near the window, her usual spot. Her coffee had gone cold. She hadn't noticed. She was reading something on her phone, not because it mattered, but because it gave her something to focus on, something to avoid thinking. That had become her habit. Fill the silence. Before it fills you. Is this seat taken? The voice was calm, not overly polite, not hesitant, just direct. Clara looked up. Daniel. At the time, there had been nothing remarkable about him. Not in the way people usually describe attraction. He wasn't overwhelming. He didn't command attention. He felt steady. She glanced at the empty chair across from her, then back at him. No, she said. He nodded once and sat down. No unnecessary conversation. No attempt to impress, just presence. For a while, they didn't speak. And strangely, that didn't feel awkward. That was the first thing Clara noticed. Most people rush to fill silence, to prove something, to establish connection. Daniel didn't. He just existed in the space. Comfortably, Clara returned to her phone, or at least pretended to, because part of her had become aware of him, not in a distracting way, in a grounding way. Like his presence wasn't pulling her attention, it was stabilizing it. And that, she would later realize, was where it started, not attraction. Relief. Do you always sit here? She hadn't noticed when he started speaking again. Clara looked up. Sometimes, she replied. He nodded slightly. Me too. She almost smiled, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Simple, unforced, like he wasn't trying to create something, just acknowledging something that already existed. That was how their conversations began, not as conversations, as observations. You don't seem like someone who enjoys mornings. Clara raised an eyebrow. That obvious? Not obvious, he said. Just consistent. She leaned back slightly. Consistent how? He paused, not searching for words, just choosing them carefully. You're here early, he said, but you're not present in it. Clara studied him for a moment. Most people wouldn't say something like that, not to a stranger. And yet, it didn't feel intrusive. It felt accurate. You analyze people often? She asked. Only when they're trying not to be seen, he replied. That landed, not heavily, just precisely, and Clara didn't know why, but she didn't deflect. Maybe I just like quiet, she said. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Quiet and avoidance aren't always the same thing, he said. Looking back now, that was the moment she should have paused. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right. Too quickly. There's something about being understood that feels like connection, but understanding, when it comes too fast, should raise a question. How does this person know this about me already? Clara hadn't asked that, because what she felt instead was something else. Recognition. I used to think that too, Daniel said. Clara frowned slightly. Used to? He nodded. Before I realized I wasn't actually seeking quiet, he said. I was just avoiding noise I didn't want to deal with. Clara felt something shift inside her. Not because of the words, but because of how familiar they sounded. Like something she had thought before, but never said out loud. You make it sound simple, she said. It's not simple, Daniel replied. It's just honest. That word, honest. Clara remembered it clearly now, because at the time, it had felt like relief. Finally, someone who didn't play games, didn't pretend, didn't complicate things unnecessarily, or at least, that's what she believed. Back then, she hadn't noticed something important. Daniel didn't reveal himself. He revealed her. He didn't talk about his past. He asked about hers. He didn't share his struggles. He reflected hers, and Clara. She responded, not all at once, not immediately, but gradually, carefully, until conversations with him felt easier than conversations with anyone else. Do you ever get tired of explaining yourself to people? He asked her once. Clara laughed softly. All the time. He nodded. Me too, he said. A pause. That's why I prefer listening. And she believed that, because it made sense, because it felt right, because it aligned with the version of him she had already started forming in her mind. But now, standing on a quiet street, replaying that moment, Clara saw something different. He wasn't just listening. He was learning what she valued, learning what she feared, learning what she needed to hear. And, slowly, carefully, he gave her exactly that. Clara stopped walking. Her breath slowed. And for the first time since leaving the cafe, something settled fully into place. She hadn't fallen for him. Not really. She had fallen for the feeling of being understood. And that feeling had been constructed, not randomly, not accidentally, but intentionally. Clara opened her eyes. The street around her felt the same, but she didn't, because now she wasn't remembering their connection. She was understanding it, and understanding changes everything. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over Daniel's name. For a moment, just a moment, she considered calling him, not to accuse, not to confront, but to hear his voice, to see if it still felt the same. And that thought alone told her everything she needed to know, because even now, after everything she had seen, a part of her still wanted to believe him, and that was the most dangerous part of all. There's a version of every relationship we carry in our minds, not the full version, not the accurate one, just the one that felt the safest to believe. Clara had built hers carefully, piece by piece, moment by moment, not out of delusion, but out of selection. She chose what made sense. She kept what felt good, and everything else she quietly explained away. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to defend someone you care about, even when something doesn't sit right? Not because you're naive, but because losing the idea of them feels heavier than holding on to the confusion. Clara understood that now, because she had done exactly that. She sat down on a bench along the sidewalk, her phone still in her hand. Daniel's name remained on the screen, unopened, unpressed, waiting, just like he always had, not demanding, not chasing, just there. That had been part of his appeal. He never overwhelmed her, never rushed anything, never made her feel like she had to keep up. And at the time, that had felt like respect. Now, it felt like distance. Clara leaned back slightly, letting her head rest against the cool metal behind her, and the memories came again. Not forced, not searched for, just rising. Do you ever feel like people only understand parts of you? Daniel had asked her once. They were sitting in the same cafe, same table, same quiet rhythm of conversation. All the time, Clara said. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he murmured. Most people don't listen long enough to understand the whole picture. Clara looked at him then, really looked. And you do? She asked. He didn't answer immediately, just held her gaze. I try, he said. That answer had stayed with her, not because it was impressive, but because it felt sincere. Looking back now, Clara noticed something she hadn't before. He didn't say yes. He said, I try. Just enough humility to feel real, just enough distance to avoid commitment. That was his pattern. Always close enough to connect, never close enough to be known. Clara exhaled slowly. Her grip on her phone loosened. There had been other moments too, small ones, the kind you don't question at the time, but now, they stood out. I don't really like talking about money, Daniel had said once. Clara had laughed lightly. Most people don't say that, unless they have a lot of it. He smiled. That same careful smile. Or none of it, he replied. She tilted her head. So which one is it? A pause. Then, would it change anything? Clara had thought about it for a second, then shook her head. No, she said. And she meant it. Because what mattered to her wasn't what he had. It was how he made her feel. Seen, that was enough. But now, that moment felt different. Because he hadn't answered the question. He had redirected it, gently, skillfully, and she had followed, willingly. Another memory surfaced. You don't ask many questions about me, Clara had said one afternoon. Daniel looked at her, not surprised. Is that a problem? He asked. She shrugged slightly. I don't know. Most people would be curious. He leaned back in his chair. I think people ask questions when they're trying to fill gaps, he said. I don't feel like there are gaps with you. Clara blinked. That doesn't make sense, she said. He smiled faintly. It does, if you're paying attention. At the time, that had felt like a compliment. Like he understood her so well. He didn't need to ask more. Now, it felt like something else. Control. Because questions create balance. They open space for both people to exist. And Daniel, he didn't create space. He filled it with her. Clara sat up slowly. Her breathing had changed again. Not heavy, not uneven, just deeper. Because she was beginning to understand something that wasn't just about him. It was about her. She hadn't just been seen. She had been revealed. And there's a difference. A quiet but powerful one. Being seen means someone understands you. Being revealed means someone studies you and uses that understanding to shape how you feel. Clara pressed her lips together slightly. That realization didn't hurt the way she expected it to. It didn't break her. It grounded her. Because, for the first time, she wasn't asking why he did it. She was asking something far more important. Why did I accept it? Her eyes drifted back to her phone. Daniel's name, still there, unchanged. She unlocked the screen, opened their messages, scrolled. At first glance, everything looked normal. Conversations, short exchanges, moments of depth followed by space. But when she looked closer, a pattern appeared. He never started emotional conversations. He responded to them. He never shared first. He mirrored. He never created vulnerability. He reflected it. Clara's chest tightened again, not painfully, just enough. Because suddenly, it all felt clear. He didn't need to reveal himself. Because she had already given him everything he needed. Her fears, her thoughts, her patterns, and he had used them. Not violently, not obviously, but effectively. Clara locked her phone, placed it back in her purse, and sat there for a moment. Still, there was a time when this realization would have broken her, when she would have felt embarrassed, used, even ashamed. But now, she felt something else. Responsibility, not for what he did, but for what she allowed, and that difference mattered. Because responsibility doesn't trap you, it frees you. It gives you something you didn't have before. Choice. Clara stood up slowly. Her body felt lighter, not because the situation had changed, but because her understanding had. She didn't know what she was going to do yet. She didn't know if she would confront him, or ignore him, or disappear from his world the same way he had entered hers. But she knew this. Whatever she chose, it wouldn't come from confusion anymore. It would come from clarity, and clarity is where real change begins. As she started walking again, one final thought settled into place. Daniel hadn't been the first person to misunderstand her, but he was the first person who understood her, and used it. And now that she saw it, she would never experience connection the same way again. Not because she was broken, but because she was aware, and awareness, once it arrives, doesn't leave. Patterns don't announce themselves. They don't arrive labeled, organized, and easy to understand. They repeat quietly. Until one day, you stop looking at moments and start seeing the design. Clara didn't rush home. She let the day stretch, not because she was avoiding anything, but because she was beginning to understand something that required space. Truth doesn't always demand action. Sometimes it asks for observation first. Have you ever gone back through your memories? Not to relive them, but to study them. Not as the person who experienced them, but as someone trying to understand what was really happening. That shift is where clarity begins. Clara slowed her pace again as she approached an intersection. The city moved around her. Cars, voices, movement, life continuing without interruption. But inside her, everything had changed tempo. Slower, sharper, more intentional. Daniel wasn't a mystery anymore. Not in the way he had been before. He wasn't confusing. He wasn't unpredictable. He wasn't even complicated. He was consistent. And consistency is what reveals truth. Clara stopped at the corner, waiting for the light to change, and another memory surfaced. Not dramatic, not emotional, just precise. I like routine, Daniel had said once. Clara smiled faintly. You don't seem like someone who lives a routine. He tilted his head slightly. That's because you're looking at it from the outside, he replied. What does that mean? It means routines don't always look repetitive, he said. Sometimes they look like variation, but they follow the same structure. Clara had frowned slightly. That sounds like a contradiction. Daniel smiled. Only if you're focused on what changes, he said, not what stays the same. Back then, that had sounded philosophical. Now, it sounded like a confession. Clara exhaled slowly. Her eyes focused ahead, but her mind stayed behind. What stayed the same? That question settled deeply. Because everything about Daniel had felt different. Every conversation, every moment, every interaction. And yet, the structure had never changed. He always chose the setting. He always controlled the pace. He always guided the conversation. And she had followed, not blindly, not helplessly, but willingly, because it felt easy, and ease can be deceptive. Clara crossed the street slowly. Her steps were measured now, deliberate. Another memory surfaced. You always seem calm, she had told him once. Daniel looked at her. I am calm, he said. No, Clara replied, shaking her head slightly. You appear calm. That's different. He smiled faintly. Is it? Yes, she said. Appearing calm means you're managing something. Being calm means there's nothing to manage. Daniel held her gaze, and for a moment, he didn't respond. Then, I think everyone is managing something, he said. Clara studied him. And what are you managing? She asked. A pause. Then, a small shift. Subtle, almost unnoticeable. I think you're asking the wrong question, he said. Clara blinked. What's the right one? Daniel leaned forward slightly. Why does it matter to you? He asked. And just like that, the focus had shifted, away from him, back to her. Clara slowed her steps again. Her breath deepened. That moment. She remembered it clearly now, because she had felt something then. Not discomfort, not suspicion, just redirection. And she had accepted it. Not because she didn't notice, but because she didn't challenge it. There's a difference. A quiet one, but important. Not seeing something is different from seeing it, and choosing not to follow it. Clara had seen it. She just didn't stay with it long enough, because staying with it would have required something she wasn't ready for. Confrontation. Not with him, with herself. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out her phone again. This time, not to check messages, but to open her notes. Something new, something intentional. She began typing, not full sentences, just observations. Always chooses location. Redirects personal questions. Mirrors emotions. Never initiates vulnerability. Her fingers paused, then added, feels safe, but not known. Clara stared at that last line, because it captured something she hadn't been able to explain before. With Daniel, she had always felt comfortable, but never connected. Not fully. At the time, she thought that meant stability. Now, she realized what it actually meant. Distance. Carefully maintained. She slipped her phone back into her pocket, and something inside her settled even deeper. This wasn't about discovering something new. It was about acknowledging something that had always been there. That's what makes patterns so powerful. They don't create truth, they reveal it. Clara turned down another street. Quieter now, less movement, and for the first time since leaving the cafe, she felt something close to stillness. Not the kind she used to create to avoid things, but the kind that comes from understanding. Daniel hadn't been unpredictable. He had been precise, and precision. Leaves, traces. Clara just hadn't been looking for them, until now. And now that she was, she couldn't unsee them. She slowed to a stop again, her eyes lifting slightly, her thoughts settling into something clearer. This wasn't about what he did next. It was about what she would no longer ignore. Because once you see the pattern, you have a choice, to stay inside it, or step out of it. And Clara was standing right at that edge. There's a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when awareness turns into responsibility. Not responsibility for what someone else did, but for what you can no longer pretend not to see. Clara felt that shift now. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with a rush of emotion or a sudden decision. It came as a quiet understanding. She couldn't go back to not knowing. Have you ever reached a point where the truth didn't force you to act, but made it impossible to stay the same? That's where Clara stood. Not at the end of something, but at the edge of herself. She found another bench, this one tucked beneath a tree that filtered the sunlight into soft, uneven patterns on the ground. She sat, not because she was tired, but because something inside her needed stillness to settle. Her thoughts weren't scattered anymore. They were aligning, not perfectly, but enough. Daniel, the cafe, the messages, the timing, the pattern, it all connected now, not as separate events, but as a structure, and within that structure, Clara began to see something even more important, her role in it. That realization didn't come with blame. It came with clarity, because the truth wasn't just that Daniel had been intentional, it was that she had been accommodating. Another memory surfaced, not from a conversation, from a feeling, the feeling of waiting. Clara frowned slightly, because that one, she hadn't examined before, waiting for his replies, waiting for him to suggest meeting, waiting for him to open up. At the time, it hadn't felt like waiting, it had felt like patience, like respect, like giving space. But now, that same feeling had a different name. Passive acceptance. Clara's fingers pressed lightly together in her lap. There's something people don't often realize about emotional manipulation. It doesn't always feel like pressure. Sometimes, it feels like permission. Permission to be understood. Permission to feel safe. Permission to stay, without asking for more. And that's what made it so effective. Daniel hadn't forced anything. He hadn't rushed her. He hadn't even lied in obvious ways. He had simply created a space where she didn't question the absence of depth. Clara exhaled slowly. That was the part that mattered. Not what he did, but what she didn't ask for. Because asking would have changed the dynamic. It would have required him to reveal something. And maybe, deep down, she already knew he wouldn't. That thought lingered, uncomfortable, but honest. Clara leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees. Her gaze dropped to the ground, and for a moment, she allowed herself to sit with something she had avoided for a long time. Not just with Daniel, but before him. The pattern didn't start here. It rarely does. It starts earlier, quieter, in places we don't revisit often. And suddenly, Chapter 5 wasn't something ahead of her. It was something behind her. Clara's chest tightened, not sharply, but enough to be felt, because now, she wasn't just seeing Daniel clearly. She was beginning to see herself, and that kind of clarity is harder to sit with. Another thought surfaced. Simple, direct. Why didn't I ask for more? The answer didn't come immediately, but when it did, It didn't surprise her, because more comes with risk. More questions, more expectations, more honesty. And more honesty means more possibility of disappointment. Clara closed her eyes briefly. There it was. Not fear of him, fear of losing what she already had, even if what she had was incomplete. That realization settled deeply, because it explained something she hadn't been able to before, why she stayed comfortable in something undefined, because definition would have required truth, and truth might have taken him away. Clara opened her eyes slowly. The world around her hadn't changed, but her understanding had shifted again. This wasn't just about manipulation, it was about tolerance. What we tolerate shapes what we experience, and Clara had tolerated uncertainty because it felt safer than clarity. She leaned back slightly, her shoulders relaxing, not from relief, but from acceptance. There's something powerful about reaching a point where you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What did I allow?" Not to blame yourself, but to understand your patterns, because patterns can be changed. Clara reached into her purse again, pulled out her phone, opened Daniel's contact. Her thumb hovered. This time, it didn't feel like temptation. It felt like a decision point. Call him, ask questions, demand answers, or walk away, not out of fear, but out of understanding. She stared at his name, and something inside her became very clear. If she called him, she already knew what would happen. He would stay calm. He would explain. Just enough. He would redirect. He would mirror her emotions. And somehow, the conversation would leave her feeling uncertain again. Not because he was stronger, but because he was practiced. Clara exhaled slowly, and without hesitation. She locked her phone. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just intentionally, because for the first time, she understood something that changed everything. Closure doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes, it comes from recognizing patterns and choosing not to step back into them. Clara stood up. Her body felt steady, grounded. She didn't know exactly what came next, but she knew what didn't. She wouldn't return to confusion. She wouldn't negotiate clarity, and she wouldn't ignore herself to maintain something that never fully existed. As she began walking again, one final realization settled in. Daniel hadn't taken anything from her. Not really. He had only revealed something she needed to see. Not about him, but about herself. And now that she saw it, she had something far more valuable than answers. She had awareness, and awareness, when used correctly, becomes change. Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever stayed in something, not because it was right, but because it was comfortable, because it felt easier to accept less than to risk losing everything? If that's ever been you, I want you to like this video and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Because what Clara is realizing right now, it's something most people don't understand until it's too late. The past doesn't disappear. It waits, not loudly, not urgently, just patiently, until something in the present touches it in the right way, and suddenly, it's no longer behind you. It's here, alive again. Clara felt that now, not as a memory she chose to revisit, but as something that had quietly been shaping her all along. Have you ever realized that the way you love someone didn't start with them? That the way you accept, tolerate, forgive, even ignore, was learned somewhere long before they arrived? That's what Clara was beginning to see. Not just what happened with Daniel, but why it felt familiar. She didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, she found herself walking toward a place she hadn't thought about in a long time. Not consciously, not intentionally, just instinctively. The street looked smaller than she remembered, quieter, less significant, but the feeling it carried hadn't changed. Clara stopped at the corner, her eyes scanning the building across from her, a small apartment complex, old, unremarkable, but it held something important. Not memories she told people about, memories she had learned to live with. She hadn't lived there in years, but her body remembered, the way her chest tightened slightly, the way her breathing slowed, the way her thoughts became more careful. This was where it started. Not Daniel. The pattern. Clara crossed the street slowly, her steps quieter now. She stopped just outside the building, and for a moment, she didn't move, because going inside wasn't necessary. Everything she needed was already there. The memory came gently, not forced, not overwhelming, just present. She was younger, not dramatically, but enough, less guarded, less aware, still learning the difference between attention and care. His name was Marcus. Clara closed her eyes briefly. That name still carried something, not pain, but weight. Marcus had been different, or at least, That's what she told herself at the time. He was expressive, open, charming in a way that didn't feel calculated. He didn't study her, he overwhelmed her. And, in the beginning, that felt like love. "You think too much," Marcus used to say, smiling. Clara would laugh lightly. "Someone has to," she'd reply. He'd shake his head. "No," he'd say, "you just need to feel more." Back then, that sounded freeing, like permission to stop analyzing everything, like relief. But now, Clara understood something she didn't then. Being told to feel more isn't always an invitation. Sometimes, it's a way of asking you to ignore what you already feel. Clara exhaled slowly. The memory continued. Marcus wasn't consistent. Not in the way Daniel was. He was intense, present one moment, distant the next. And Clara adjusted. She learned his rhythm, not consciously, but instinctively. When he pulled away, she softened. When he returned, she welcomed him. No questions, no confrontation, just adaptation, because losing him felt heavier than understanding him. Clara's eyes opened slowly, her gaze fixed on the building in front of her. That was the beginning, not of heartbreak, but of tolerance. She had learned something in that relationship, not because someone taught her directly, but because she experienced it repeatedly. That inconsistency was something to adjust to, not something to question. And once that belief forms, it doesn't disappear. It follows you, quietly, into every connection that comes after. Clara pressed her lips together slightly, because, now, she could see it clearly. Daniel hadn't introduced a new dynamic. He had stepped into an old one, just in a different form. Where Marcus overwhelmed her, Daniel studied her. Where Marcus was unpredictable, Daniel was controlled. But the outcome? The same. She adjusted. She accommodated. She stayed. Without asking for more. Clara looked down briefly, her hands resting loosely at her sides. There's something difficult about realizing your patterns, because it removes the illusion that things just happen to you. It shows you how you participated, not out of weakness, but out of familiarity. And familiarity is powerful. It feels safe, even when it isn't. Clara turned slightly, stepping away from the building. She didn't need to stay there. She had already taken what she needed from it. Understanding. As she began walking again, another thought surfaced. Quieter, but deeper. She hadn't just learned to tolerate inconsistency. She had learned to earn stability, to prove she was worth staying for, to be easy, to be understanding, to not ask for too much. And Daniel had fit perfectly into that. Because he didn't require her to ask for more, he rewarded her for not asking. Clara's chest tightened again, not painfully, but enough. Because now, everything made sense. Not just what happened, but why it felt so natural. She stopped again, her eyes lifting slightly, her thoughts settling into something clearer. This wasn't just about letting go of Daniel. It was about breaking something older, something deeper. A belief that love requires adjustment. That connection means understanding the other person, without requiring the same in return. Clara exhaled slowly, and for the first time, she felt something shift. Not just awareness, but readiness. Because understanding your pattern is one thing, changing it is another, and that was what came next. Understanding where something begins doesn't immediately tell you how to end it. Clara felt that now, standing between who she had been and who she was beginning to see clearly. There was a space, uncomfortable, unfamiliar, but necessary. Have you ever realized something about yourself that made perfect sense and still didn't feel easy to change? That's because awareness doesn't erase patterns, it only exposes them. And once exposed, you're left with a choice. Clara walked without direction again, not lost, just processing, because what she had uncovered wasn't just about Daniel. It wasn't even just about Marcus. It was about the version of herself that had learned to survive connection by minimizing her needs. That version didn't disappear overnight. It lingered, it whispered, it justified, and right now, it was speaking again. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe you should at least hear him out. Clara stopped walking. Her jaw tightened slightly. That voice felt familiar, comfortable, reasonable, and that's what made it dangerous. Because it didn't sound like doubt, it sounded like logic. But Clara had learned something today, something she wasn't going to ignore. Not every thought deserves to be trusted. Just because it sounds calm, she exhaled slowly. Let the voice pass without responding to it. That was new. Before, she would have followed it, analyzed it, turned it into a reason to stay open, to stay available, to stay uncertain. Now, She observed it, and let it go. That small shift felt bigger than anything else that had happened so far, because change doesn't begin with action. It begins with interruption, interrupting the automatic response, the familiar reaction. The pattern. Clara resumed walking, her steps slower now, more grounded. Another memory surfaced, not from Marcus, not from Daniel, from herself, a moment she hadn't thought about in years. She was younger, standing in front of a mirror, getting ready for something she couldn't even remember now. But she remembered the feeling, uncertainty, not about how she looked, but about how she would be received. She had stared at her reflection and thought, "Don't be too much." That sentence had stayed with her, quietly, not as something she repeated consciously, but as something she lived by. Don't ask too many questions. Don't expect too much. Don't push too hard, because being too much risked being left. Clara's chest tightened slightly. That belief, it hadn't started with Daniel. It hadn't even started with Marcus. It had been there long before, and every relationship after had simply reinforced it, until it became truth, or at least, what felt like truth. Clara slowed to a stop again, her eyes closing briefly. This time, the feeling wasn't just understanding. It was grief, not for Daniel, not for Marcus, but for herself, for the version of her who learned to shrink in order to stay. That kind of grief is quiet. It doesn't break you. It settles in your chest and asks to be acknowledged. Clara placed a hand lightly against her sternum, breathing slowly. "I didn't know," she whispered, not as an excuse, but as recognition, because she hadn't known, not fully, not consciously. She had just adapted, like people do, like most people do, until something forces them to stop and see. Clara opened her eyes. The world around her continued, unchanged, but inside, something had shifted again, not dramatically, but deeply, because now, she wasn't just aware of her pattern, she felt it, and feeling it, made it real, in a different way. Harder to ignore, harder to return to. She reached into her purse again, pulled out her phone. Daniel's name, still there, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Before, it carried curiosity, then confusion, then temptation. Now, it carried clarity. She stared at it for a moment, and something simple, but powerful, settled in her mind. If I respond, I continue the pattern. That was it. Not dramatic, not emotional, just true. Because responding wasn't just about him. It was about stepping back into a version of herself she had just outgrown. Clara's thumb hovered over the screen. Not to call, not to message, but to delete. She paused, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness, because this wasn't about cutting him off. It was about choosing herself. And choices like that deserve to be felt, fully, without rushing, without distraction. Clara exhaled slowly, and then she deleted the conversation, not angrily, not dramatically, just intentionally. The screen cleared. Daniel's name disappeared from the thread, and with it, something else lifted. Not the memory, not the experience, but the attachment. Clara lowered her phone, slipped it back into her purse. Her shoulders felt lighter, not because everything was resolved, but because something had been decided, and decisions bring a kind of peace that confusion never can. She started walking again, this time with direction, not toward a place, but toward herself. As she moved forward, one final realization settled quietly within her. You don't break patterns by understanding them once. You break them by choosing differently, when it matters, and this time, Clara had, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to begin. Clarity doesn't always feel like relief. Sometimes, it feels like emptiness. Not the painful kind, not the kind that demands to be filled, but the kind that appears when something you were holding on to is no longer there. Clara felt that now, walking through the late afternoon light, her phone quiet in her purse, Daniel no longer a presence waiting for her attention. There was space, and space can feel unfamiliar when you're used to emotional noise. Have you ever let go of something, and then realized you didn't know what to do with the silence that followed? That's where Clara was, not broken, not confused, just unoccupied. She reached her apartment building just as the sun began to soften. The hallway felt the same, the elevator hummed the same, everything external remained unchanged, but internally, there was a shift she couldn't ignore. She stepped inside her apartment, closed the door behind her, and stood still. No music, no TV, no immediate distraction, just presence. That was new. Before, she would have filled the silence quickly, scrolled through her phone, replayed conversations, looked for something to occupy her thoughts. Now, she let the silence stay, because for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt honest. Clara placed her purse gently on the table. Her eyes lingered on it for a moment. That same purse, the one that started everything, not because it was forgotten, but because it revealed something. She walked past it slowly, moved toward the window, looked out. The city stretched below, busy, unaware, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel something she had been holding back. Not anger, not sadness, but truth. "He never loved me," she said quietly. The words didn't echo, they didn't break anything. They settled, because they weren't spoken in pain. They were spoken in understanding. And understanding doesn't need drama. Clara rested her forehead lightly against the glass. There's something difficult about accepting that what you felt was real, even if what the other person felt was not, because it creates a strange imbalance. One person experiences connection, the other creates it. Clara exhaled slowly. Daniel hadn't lied in obvious ways. He hadn't made grand promises. He hadn't claimed love. He had simply allowed her to feel it, and that was enough. Clara stepped back from the window. Her mind moved again, not backward, but deeper. She began to replay conversations, not emotionally, analytically, looking for structure, for consistency, for truth beneath the words. "You notice things most people miss," Daniel had told her once. She remembered that clearly, because it had felt like validation, like he saw her in a way others didn't. But now, she saw something else. He wasn't complimenting her, he was encouraging her to stay in that role, observant, reflective, focused on him, because the more she observed him, the less she questioned him. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. That realization landed differently. He had shaped the dynamic, without ever stating it, and she had accepted it, because it felt natural. Another memory surfaced. "You're easy to talk to," Daniel had said. Clara smiled faintly at the time. "Is that a good thing?" she asked. He nodded. "It means you don't complicate things," he said. Back then, that sounded like appreciation. Now, it sounded like approval. Approval for being undemanding, for not pushing, for not asking. Clara crossed her arms loosely. There it was again. The pattern, not just in him, in her. She had been rewarded for being easy, and slowly. She had learned to stay that way, because ease kept things going, even if it meant sacrificing depth. Clara walked toward the couch and sat down, her movements calm, deliberate. There was no urge to cry, no urge to react, just awareness settling deeper. This wasn't heartbreak, not in the way people describe it. It wasn't about losing someone, it was about losing an illusion, and illusions don't leave pain behind, they leave clarity. Clara leaned back slightly, her gaze drifting to the ceiling. She thought about all the moments she had replayed before, the conversations she had held onto, the meaning she had assigned to small things, and now, they all felt different, not meaningless, just redefined, because meaning depends on context, and her context had changed. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Another thought surfaced, quieter, but sharper. He wasn't choosing me. That realization didn't sting, because it was followed immediately by something stronger. I wasn't choosing myself either, and that was the part that mattered. Clara opened her eyes, her breathing steady. This wasn't about confronting him, it wasn't about exposing him, it wasn't even about understanding him further, because she already understood enough. This was about what came next, and for the first time, that question didn't feel overwhelming. It felt open, because when you remove confusion, you create possibility. Clara stood up slowly, walked back toward the table, her purse still resting there. She picked it up, held it for a moment, feeling its weight, and this time, it felt different, not like something she forgot, but like something she reclaimed, because that moment, that small, ordinary mistake, had given her something she didn't know she needed. Truth, and truth, when accepted, doesn't destroy you, it rebuilds you. Clara set the purse down again, her posture shifting slightly, more grounded now, and in that quiet space, she made another decision, not about Daniel, but about herself. She would no longer be easy. At the cost of being unseen, she would no longer accept understanding, without being understood in return, and most importantly, she would no longer ignore herself, to maintain something that never fully existed. Clara exhaled slowly, and for the first time since everything began, she didn't feel like she was losing something. She felt like she was returning to herself, Change rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with certainty or confidence. It begins quietly. In the small decisions no one else sees. Clara felt that now, not as a sudden transformation, not as a new version of herself, but as a shift in how she responded to what used to feel familiar. Have you ever noticed how growth doesn't feel powerful in the moment? It feels subtle, almost invisible, like choosing not to send a message you would have sent before, like sitting in silence instead of reaching for distraction, like letting something end without trying to understand it one more time. That's where Clara was, not finished, not healed completely, just different enough. The evening settled around her apartment slowly. Shadows lengthened, the light softened, and for the first time in a long while, Clara didn't reach for her phone. She moved through her space quietly, not avoiding it, not filling it, just existing in it. That was new, because before, stillness felt like something to escape. Now, it felt like something to trust. She made herself tea, sat by the window again, and allowed her thoughts to come and go without attaching to them. Daniel appeared again, not as a question, not as confusion, just as a memory. And that difference mattered, because memories don't pull you, they pass through you. Clara watched that happen, watched the way her mind brought him forward, and then let him fade without resistance. No replay, no analysis, no attempt to make sense of anything further, because there was nothing left to figure out. And that realization felt like closure. Not the kind that comes from a conversation, not the kind that comes from answers, the kind that comes from understanding enough to stop asking. Clara lifted her cup slowly, took a sip, warm, simple, grounding. Her eyes drifted to the reflection in the window. She looked the same, but something about her felt more present, less divided, because before, part of her was always waiting, waiting for a message, waiting for clarity, waiting for something to confirm what she felt. Now, there was nothing to wait for, and that absence was freeing. Another thought surfaced. What if he reaches out? Clara didn't push it away. She let it sit, examined it, not from fear, from awareness. What if he does? What would she say? The answer came easily, not rehearsed, not forced, nothing, not out of anger, not out of avoidance, but out of alignment, because responding would reopen something she had already closed internally. And closure doesn't need to be negotiated. It needs to be maintained. Clara exhaled softly. That realization felt steady, not emotional, solid. She set her cup down. There was something else now. A quiet shift in how she saw connection itself. Before, she believed that being understood was rare, something to hold on to, something to protect. Now, she saw it differently. Being understood isn't enough, because someone can understand you, and still not choose you, still not value you, still not meet you. And that changes everything. Clara leaned back slightly. The space around her felt calm, not empty, complete. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't realized she was missing. Stability, not from someone else, from herself. Time passed quietly. The evening deepened into night. Lights flickered on across the buildings outside, and Clara remained where she was, not stuck, present. At some point, she stood up, walked to the small table near the door, her purse still resting there. She picked it up again, opened it, looked inside. Everything was still there. Her wallet, her keys, her phone charger, nothing missing. And yet, something had changed. Because this time, she wasn't looking at what was inside. She was thinking about what it had revealed. That small moment, forgetting it, coming back, seeing the truth. It could have gone unnoticed, ignored, explained away, but it didn't. And that made all the difference. Clara closed the purse gently, set it back down. There are moments in life that feel insignificant when they happen, but later, you realize they were turning points, not because of what they were, but because of what they showed you. Clara walked back to the window one last time, her reflection steady now, grounded, and for the first time, she didn't see someone trying to understand love. She saw someone who understood herself, and that was enough. As she turned away from the window, one final truth settled quietly within her. You don't need someone to explain why they couldn't love you. You just need to recognize when they didn't, and choose not to stay, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. And with that, Clara stepped fully into a version of herself that no longer needed confusion to feel connection. Some endings don't feel like endings. They feel like returning, not to a place, not to a person, but to a version of yourself you left behind without realizing it. Clara understood that now. Not all at once, not as a grand realization, but as something quiet, steady, true. Have you ever walked back into a place where something once changed you, and realized you're no longer the same person who stood there before? That's where Clara found herself the next morning. She didn't hesitate, didn't question why, didn't overthink it. She just went back. The cafe looked exactly the same. Same door, same bell, same quiet hum of routine. But this time, she wasn't stepping into it unconsciously. She was choosing it. That difference mattered. The bell chimed as she entered. The barista looked up, recognized her, smiled lightly. "Morning," he said. Clara nodded. "Morning." Her voice was calm, not forced, not distant, just present. "Usual?" he asked. She paused for a second, then nodded. Yeah, that small exchange felt different. Not because anything had changed externally, but because she was no longer using routine to avoid herself. She was using it to ground herself. Clara took her coffee, walked toward the same table, the same one, the one where everything had begun, and for a moment, she stood beside it, not sitting, just observing. There was a time when this space held meaning she didn't question, conversations she replayed, moments she held onto. Now, it felt like something else, neutral, not painful, not special, just a place. Clara sat down, placed her purse on the table, deliberately. That mattered, because this time, she was aware of it, aware of herself, aware of the moment. No distractions, no drifting thoughts, just presence. She took a sip of her coffee, warm, familiar, and something settled inside her. Not closure, something deeper, integration, because what she had learned was no longer separate from her. It had become part of how she saw things, how she understood people, how she understood herself. Clara looked out the window. The street moved as usual. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything felt clearer. Daniel didn't appear in her thoughts the same way anymore. He wasn't a question. He wasn't a possibility. He wasn't even a mistake. He was a lesson, not in a cliché way, not in a forced, everything happens for a reason kind of way, but in a real way. He showed her something she hadn't seen, and once seen, it couldn't be undone. Clara rested her hand lightly on the table. Another thought surfaced. Quiet, but important. What if I see this again? Not Daniel, but the pattern. What if someone else comes along, and it feels the same? She didn't rush to answer. She sat with it, because this time, she wasn't looking for reassurance. She was looking for truth. And the truth came simply, then I'll recognize it. That was it. Not fear, not resistance, just awareness. Because once you understand something deeply, you don't need to avoid it. You just don't fall into it the same way. Clara exhaled softly. That realization felt steady, not empowering in a dramatic sense, but grounding, because it removed something she hadn't realized she was carrying. Doubt. Not about him, about herself. Before, she questioned her judgment, her instincts, her ability to see clearly. Now, she didn't. Not because she would never make a mistake again, but because she trusted her ability to learn from it. And that trust changes everything. Clara reached for her purse, opened it briefly, then closed it again. A small action, but this time, intentional. She smiled faintly, not because she felt happy in a loud, overwhelming way, but because she felt aligned, and alignment is quieter than happiness, but stronger. The cafe door opened, the bell chimed again. Clara glanced up, not expecting anything, not anticipating anyone, just noticing. A man walked in, new, unfamiliar. He looked around briefly, then toward the counter. Clara's gaze lingered for a second, not with curiosity, not with interest, just awareness. Then she looked away, and that was the difference. Before, she would have noticed more, wondered more. Now, she didn't need to, because she wasn't searching anymore. She was present, and presence doesn't reach, it receives. Clara took another sip of her coffee. The moment remained simple, quiet, complete, and for the first time, she didn't feel like something was missing. Because nothing was. She wasn't waiting, she wasn't wondering, she wasn't hoping, she was just there, and that, was enough. Chapter 7. Part 2. Some endings don't close with a final conversation. No last words, no explanations, no perfect sense of resolution. They end quietly. When you stop returning to what once held you. Clara didn't think about Daniel again that morning, not because she was forcing herself not to, but because there was nothing left pulling her back. That was the difference. Have you ever noticed how something only has power over you as long as you keep revisiting it? Not physically, but mentally. emotionally, and the moment you stop, it doesn't chase you, it fades. Clara sat there a little longer, finishing her coffee slowly, not dragging the moment, not holding on to it, just allowing it to be complete. That was new. Before, she would have lingered for a reason, waiting, thinking, replaying. Now, she simply finished, and stood up. She picked up her purse, slung it over her shoulder. This time, she felt its weight immediately. Not because it was heavy, but because she was aware, a small thing, but meaningful. She walked toward the door, each step steady, unrushed, and just before she reached it, she paused. Not out of hesitation, out of recognition. This was the same moment, the same door, the same space, the same position she had stood in before, right before everything shifted. But this time, she was different. Clara placed her hand on the handle, and instead of ignoring the feeling inside her, she listened, not to fear, not to doubt, but to something quieter, something grounded. She felt certain, not about what would happen next, but about herself, and that kind of certainty doesn't need details, it doesn't need guarantees, it just exists. Clara opened the door. The cool air met her again, just like before, but this time, it didn't feel like the beginning of something unknown. It felt like continuation of something she now understood. She stepped outside. The street was alive, people moving, cars passing, life continuing without pause. And Clara walked into it, not as someone searching for something, but as someone no longer needing to. Her phone remained in her purse, silent, unchecked, and, for once, that silence didn't carry expectation. It carried peace. Days passed, not dramatically, not filled with sudden changes, just naturally. Clara returned to her routine, work, mornings, evenings, but something subtle had shifted in how she moved through them. She noticed more, not just people, but herself. When she felt the urge to minimize her thoughts, she didn't. When she felt the instinct to make things easier for others, at her own expense, she paused, not always perfectly, but enough to interrupt the pattern. And that was where change lived. One afternoon, her phone buzzed. Clara glanced at it casually. A message, unknown number. She stared at it for a moment, not anxious, not curious, just aware. She didn't open it immediately, because she didn't need to. That urgency, the need to know, to respond, to engage, it wasn't there anymore. After a few seconds, she unlocked her phone, opened the message. Hey, it's me. No name, no explanation, just that. Clara looked at the screen, and for a brief moment, she felt something familiar. Not emotion, recognition. The old version of her would have responded instantly, asked questions, opened the door again. But this version paused, not out of confusion, out of clarity. She read the message once more. Then, she locked her phone. No reply. Not as a statement, not as a reaction, just a decision. Because some things don't need closure. They need boundaries. Clara slipped her phone back into her purse, and kept walking. Nothing dramatic happened after that. No confrontation, no final scene. Just continuation. And that's what made it real. Because real change isn't loud. It's consistent. It's choosing yourself. Again, and again, and again. As Clara walked forward, one final understanding settled quietly within her. You don't need to prove you've changed. You just live differently. And eventually, that becomes who you are. She adjusted her purse slightly on her shoulder, felt its weight, present, grounded, real, and for the first time in a long time. Clara wasn't carrying anything she didn't understand. Not confusion, not doubt, not someone else's version of connection, just herself. And that was more than enough.